All right, so now let's continue with the transaction. Transaction means the purchase and the selling of the bonds here, okay? Who are the sellers of the bonds and who are the purchasers of the bonds? Well, these are just examples of the sellers and the buyers here, okay? So, who are the sellers? Well, the government can sell. In the case of Indonesia, SUN is an example, Surat Utang Negara. So, government can sell the bonds, okay? Banks also can sell the bond. Why? Because bank, like any corporate sector, they can issue bonds too. Suppose I have a bank, and then I need some extra money. I don't know, for whatever reason. Suppose I need to do an expansion, so I want to open 10 new branches, for example. I need a lot of money, right? And whatever the money I have in the bank is not enough. So I need to raise money, okay? Now, one way to do it is I issue bonds, and then I sell that bonds in the market. So banks can also sell bonds, basically. Now, household, some of us are holding bonds. Why? Because we buy it from, I don't know, suppose we buy SUN, okay? But then, one day, we need the money, we need the cash, so we sell the bond. So we can also sell the bond. Household can also sell the bond, okay? Firms, well, in the case of firms, it's a similar story like in a bank. Firms can also issue bonds, and if they issue bonds, they're selling it, basically. And then bond dealers, bond dealers is like stock market dealers, basically. They can do selling and purchasing, okay? Sometimes they do that to represent their clients. Sometimes they do that for themselves, okay? And last but not least, and this is very important, the central bank. So CB is central bank, okay? So Bank Indonesia can issue bonds, central bank bonds, okay? Who are the buyers, okay? Again, the same group of people here, they can buy too. Banks can buy bonds. In fact, in Indonesia, the largest buyers of the government bonds in Indonesia are banks. So banks are buyers of bonds too. Household can buy. You can decide to buy soon if you want. Okay? Firms can buy also. Okay? Dealers can buy. Okay? And then central bank can buy. Now, how could that happen? How could central bank buy bonds? Well, it is very possible. If the sellers of the bonds are government, and let's say the economic condition is not in a good shape for whatever reason, so that the government needs a lot of money, then the government will issue a lot of bonds here, right? The question is, who is going to buy? If the government needs a lot of money and they issue bond, there has to be the buyers. Well, let's think about two scenarios here. Scenario one is no buyers. What happens if there's no buyers? Okay, let's have discussion a little bit. What happens if Indonesian government issue bonds, okay, and then there is no buyers? What happens?
Sir?
Yeah?
Maybe foreign country will buy the bonds.
Okay, let me continue. Suppose foreign country doesn't want to buy. What happens? Well, in order for you to understand, just imagine, suppose Iwan, I'm issuing bonds, so I'm selling you bonds. What is bonds, by the way? Bond is a piece of paper, okay? Of course, remember, let's repeat 10 minutes ago what I said. What do people consider before they decided to buy bonds or not?
Yield. The yield,
What? Yield. And then?
price,
And then?
return.
And then?
Expected return.
Yeah, yield and return is the same basically. And then what? Remember there's one question about is there formula?
Get in the when the loan is due.
Uh-huh. You mean the maturity?
Yeah. Yes, I mean the maturity.
Yeah, okay. But what else? So yield, price, maturity, and what else? We discussed earlier, and I show you some example.
The
Risk factor. Why you don't consider risk? Risk. Suppose you don't know me, okay? Why are you buying from me? From someone whom you don't know? There's a high risk here. Or even if you know me, and it so happened that you know me that I've been cheating all the time. Suppose you know me for 10 years and every year I'm cheating on you and so on. Do you want to buy something from me? No. Of course you don't want, right? So, think about that. And if that is the case, and I badly need the money, so what would I do? What would I do to lure you so that you are interested to buy? What should I do?
The bond issuer can lower the price or increase the interest to compensate the risk.
To increase the yield, right, basically.
Yes.
All right. So that's it. That's basically it. So you compensate by raising the yield, okay? But you learn today that the yield is inversely related with the price. So when I said I'm raising the yield, it's the same thing with I'm saying, okay, I lower the price. It's almost like, simple transaction. If I'm selling you something you don't want to buy, I lower the price until you want to buy. So the same thing if, for example, Indonesian governments want to issue bonds because they need money, and then if there is no if there is no buyers, then what the government can do is to increase the yield, which is the same by saying lower the price. Okay? So that is the way it works now. Earlier, I was showing you that the central bank can also buy bonds, right? So Bank Indonesia can also buy bonds. So Bank Indonesia can also buy government bonds. Bank Indonesia can buy surat utang negara. Again, one example is that if, for example, no one wants to buy surat utang negara, okay, then the government may be in trouble, right? Because they need the money. Okay, one way that the government can do is raise the yield. Okay, now I don't know. Now it's about 7%. Raise the yield to 10%. Still, there is no buyer. So what do? You continue to raise the yield to 15%. Now, essentially, the government will try anything in order for market for people to buy, right? Essentially, and one way to do it is by raising the yield. But of course, there's a risk of it. Why? Because yield is the same with interest rate. So sometimes in the future, when the bonds mature, the government have to pay higher interest rate. So the government didn't want to do that. So maybe they're willing to raise the yield from 7% to 9%, but above 9%, they're reluctant to do that. So if that is the case, and let's say with 9% you still do not want to buy, who's going to buy? Here is where the central bank usually jump in. Okay? So this is an example where the central bank of a country is also a buyer of the government bonds, because sometimes the government needs the money, but the market is not that good, so there are not many buyers. So the central bank can replace the role of the buyers of the government bonds. Is that clear? Do you understand all this story? Which, by the way, it's happening, I don't know, last week I heard, I just read in the media that Bank Indonesia buying a lot of the government bonds. Why? Because of, the government needs a lot of money because of this coronavirus things and so forth. So anyway, this is just an example, the transactions of the bonds. Yes? Go ahead.
Okay, you mentioned that if there is no buyer for the government bonds, then central bank would buy the government bonds. But then where do the central bank get the money to repay and to buy the government bonds? And
go ahead.
Where do government gets the money to repay the central bank? If that makes sense.
Sure, it does make sense. Okay. All right. Where do the central bank, get the money from? Central bank can print money, right? Of course, that is the last resort. But central bank usually have reserve also. So, for example, central bank has the foreign reserve. Do you remember? I think the first week, the TA was teaching you about different accounts, okay? And one of the account is called the balance of payment. And at the bottom of the balance of payment, there is a foreign reserve. So who's holding that foreign reserve? It's central bank, basically, okay? So if they cannot use that, then they can print money, because printing money is the job of the central bank, basically, right? So that's where they get the money. Now your second question, where do the Indonesian government get the money? Because eventually they have to repay, right? If they're selling the bonds to the central bank. Well, the logic is that the government needs the money now, okay? For what? Well, whatever, for stabilizing the condition because of the coronavirus, there's a shock and so on. So for the short run, the government needs the money with the hope a few years from now, when the economy gets stabilized, then the government will get back to the normal. They will receive the money from taxes, from non-tax revenue, from any other source, and then they will use that to pay back the central bank. Is that clear?
Sir,
Yes.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Well, this is not that related, but since we're talking about bonds transaction, I might as well ask you this. Can you explain about the central bank 7 days repo rate?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just don't get that one.
Okay. Well, basically, the role of, there are many different interest rates, okay? Interest rate that the central bank assign is not the same with the interest rate that you will receive if you put your money in the bank. It's different, okay?